In the shadowed alleys of 19th-century Boston, where gas lamps flickered against the creeping darkness, there lived a boy whose curiosity knew no bounds. But his obsession was unlike any other. While other children chased dreams, he chased death. Not the finality of it, but the secrets it whispered. They called him a genius, a prodigy, but beneath that brilliance lurked a darkness that would unravel the very fabric of his town's sanity. This is the story of Thomas Whitaker, the boy who dissected death as if it were a science experiment, uncovering horrors that were meant to stay buried. What he discovered changed him, and those around him, forever. The line between life and death blurred, and the dead began to speak. If you think you know death, think again. In 1886, Boston was a city caught between progress and superstition. The Industrial Revolution rumbled through its streets, but shadows lingered in its oldest corners. It was in these shadows that Thomas Whitaker grew up, a boy unlike any other. From an early age, Thomas was fascinated by death. Not the mournful wails or funerals draped in black, but the cold, scientific truth behind it. While other children played in the dusty streets, Thomas was drawn to the city morgue and the medical colleges, where corpses told silent stories waiting to be decoded. His mother, a strict woman with iron will and sharp eyes, warned him endlessly. There are some things even the smartest minds should never seek. But Thomas couldn't be stopped. At just 12, he had read every medical textbook on human anatomy and pathology he could find. He learned how the heart ceased to beat, how the brain's light faded, and how the soul supposedly slipped away. To him, death was not an end. It was a puzzle. One evening, Thomas stumbled upon a secret. In an abandoned part of the city hospital, behind locked doors, he found a hidden basement filled with preserved bodies and medical journals dated decades before his birth. Among them lay a curious diary belonging to a Dr. Samuel Crane, a controversial figure rumored to have dabbled in forbidden science, experiments that blurred the line between life and death. The diary detailed gruesome procedures and cryptic notes about awakening the dead, bridging the veil, and unlocking the eternal spark. The chilling thing was, some entries hinted that these experiments had succeeded, but with terrible costs. Thomas's heart raced. The boy's insatiable mind saw opportunity. What if death wasn't final? What if there was a way to bring back those lost beyond the grave, or to peer into the dark unknown that death guarded? Driven by a mix of genius and madness, Thomas began his own experiments, first on rats, then on animals, and finally on those who had no one to speak for them. His laboratory was hidden deep within the city's forgotten tunnels, where no one could hear the muffled screams or the whirring of strange machines. With each experiment, Thomas grew more detached from reality. Friends disappeared. Townsfolk whispered about a ghostly boy wandering at night. Strange lights flickered in abandoned buildings. Then, the nightmares began. Thomas's dreams were invaded by shadowy figures, the dead, but not peaceful. They spoke to him, warned him, and sometimes begged. The line between the living and the dead began to dissolve. As Thomas pushed the boundaries further, the city itself seemed to change. People vanished. Strange illnesses swept through neighborhoods. A sinister presence took root, born from the boy's dangerous curiosity. Was Thomas merely a genius seeking knowledge, or had he unleashed something far worse, something that refused to rest in death's cold embrace? The hidden basement had become Thomas's sanctuary and his prison. Night after night, he worked under the flickering light of a single candle, poring over Dr. Samuel Crane's diary and conducting experiments that no sane mind would dare imagine. His hands, once steady and precise, now trembled with a mixture of fear and excitement. The air was thick with the metallic scent of chemicals and the faint, lingering odor of decay. Rats, once mere test subjects, now stared at him with glassy, unblinking eyes, their bodies twitching unnaturally, caught in a state neither alive nor fully dead. Thomas's obsession grew uncontrollable. The boy who had once marveled at the cold facts of death now sought to conquer it, to unravel its deepest mysteries. One evening, as rain battered the city streets above, Thomas attempted his most daring experiment yet. Using equipment scavenged from the old hospital and the forbidden knowledge from the diary, he attempted to reanimate a recently deceased man, a homeless soul whose death had gone unnoticed. The machine hummed to life, cables crackling with energy. Thomas held his breath as he applied the electrodes and began the incantations found scrawled in Crane's faded handwriting. Suddenly, the corpse's fingers twitched, its chest heaved, and a faint, rasping breath escaped its pale lips. Thomas's heart thundered. He had done it. Death was no longer the end. But something was wrong. The man's eyes snapped open. But they were not human. Black pits that swallowed the dim light, voids filled with rage and something far older. The reanimated corpse lurched forward, a guttural growl ripping from its throat. Thomas stumbled back, fear slicing through his awe. The creature lunged, but Thomas was quicker, slamming the lever to shut down the machine. The lights died, and silence enveloped the chamber. The body collapsed, lifeless once again. Shaken but unbroken, Thomas realized that he had awakened something terrible, something that should never be disturbed. Days passed, and strange happenings began to ripple through Boston's shadows. People reported seeing figures moving through foggy streets, voices whispering in empty alleyways, and a chilling sense of dread that crept into every home. More disturbingly, Thomas noticed changes within himself. He felt the presence of unseen eyes watching, heard voices calling him from the darkness, and dreams invaded by shadowy specters demanding more sacrifices. The boy who studied death was now being hunted by death itself. One night, Thomas discovered a new entry in Dr. Crane's diary, a warning scrawled in frantic handwriting. The veil between life and death is thin here. To meddle with the dead is to invite the darkness. The collector watches, and he is not kind. But who or what was the collector? Determined to find answers, Thomas ventured deeper into the city's forgotten underworld, where the boundary between the living and the dead was thinnest. It was there he uncovered a secret society, an ancient cult that worshipped death as a living entity and sought to harvest souls to feed their dark master. Thomas was no longer just a curious boy. He was a pawn in a much larger, more terrifying game. The collector was real, and now he had come for Thomas. The night air hung heavy with mist as Thomas slipped through the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Boston, heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. The secret cult, the Keepers of the Veil, moved like shadows themselves, their whispered chants echoing off the damp stone walls. They worshipped death not as an end, but as an insatiable force, an entity hungry for souls to consume. Thomas had no choice but to confront them. Armed only with his knowledge and a flickering lantern, he descended into their hidden sanctum, a chamber adorned with macabre relics and eerie symbols etched deep into the walls. At the center stood a grotesque altar, piled high with bones and faded photographs, reminders of those who had vanished from the city, their bodies never found. The air was thick with incense and a metallic tang that clawed at Thomas's throat. The cultists noticed him immediately. Their leader, a gaunt man with eyes as cold as the grave, stepped forward. "You meddle in forces beyond your comprehension, boy," he hissed. "The collector does not forgive. He does not forget." Thomas's mind raced. The collector wasn't just a myth. He was a force that sustained the cult's power, a being that existed between life and death, feeding on the souls of the damned. Suddenly, the walls seemed to breathe. Shadows shifted and coalesced, forming a towering figure draped in tattered robes, its face hidden beneath a shroud of darkness. The collector had come. Thomas barely had time to react as the creature's hollow eyes locked onto his. A cold, paralyzing fear gripped his limbs, yet an inexplicable resolve burned within him. This was his moment, his chance to unravel the truth and end the nightmare he had unleashed. Drawing on every ounce of courage, Thomas recalled the last page of Dr. Crane's diary, a ritual meant to sever the veil and banish the collector back to the void. With trembling hands, he began the incantation, chanting words lost to time. The chamber trembled, the cultists screamed, caught between terror and reverence. The collector shrieked, a sound that split the very air, as the shadows twisted and writhed, retreating into darkness. When silence returned, Thomas collapsed, breathless and scarred, but alive. Outside, the city had changed. The oppressive fog lifted, and the whispers ceased. The curse had been broken, for now. But as Thomas looked at his own hands, pale and trembling, he knew this was only the beginning. The study of death was never truly over, and some secrets were destined to return. The dawn broke over Boston like a fragile promise, pale light struggling to push away the lingering shadows. Thomas emerged from the underground chamber, his body weary but his mind restless. The air above seemed lighter, freer, yet a sinister weight clung invisibly to the city. Whispers spread through the streets. Disappearances slowed, but nightmares grew more vivid. People spoke of unseen eyes watching them from dark corners, shadows moving just beyond vision. The veil between life and death had been torn, but the tear was not fully mended. Thomas returned home, but the sanctuary he once knew was gone. The walls of his modest room seemed to pulse with an eerie energy. At night, strange noises echoed, soft footsteps pacing, faint murmurs calling his name. He realized the collector's reach had followed him, a persistent shadow woven into his very existence. Desperate to reclaim his life, Thomas began searching for answers in every dusty tome, every forgotten manuscript in Boston's libraries. He discovered that Dr. Crane had not been the first to attempt bridging life and death. Generations before had sought the same forbidden knowledge, each ending in madness or worse. One entry chilled him to the core, a warning about the price of tampering with death's design. The soul's tether is fragile, break it, and all that remains is an endless hunger, a hollow echo of what once was. Thomas feared he had become that echo. As weeks turned to months, his experiments ceased, but the darkness never left. Strange shadows lurked in reflections, and cold hands brushed against him in the dead of night. Friends drifted away, unable to bear the unease surrounding him. One evening, Thomas found a message scrawled in his own handwriting, though he had no memory of writing it. The collector waits. The debt must be paid. Fear gnawed at his sanity. He was trapped in a cycle. The boy who studied death had become its prisoner. Boston's streets grew quiet once more. But beneath the calm, something stirred. A promise of return, a warning etched in silence. The horror was far from over. The weight of the collector's curse pressed relentlessly upon Thomas, eroding what little peace he had managed to carve from the chaos. His nights were consumed by fevered dreams, visions of shadowy figures dragging him into endless darkness, their grasp cold and unforgiving. The line between reality and nightmare blurred, leaving him trapped in a waking hell. Driven by desperation, Thomas sought out old contacts, hermits, occultists, anyone who might hold a sliver of hope to break free. One name kept recurring: Elijah Merrow, a reclusive mystic who had vanished decades earlier but was rumored to possess forbidden knowledge about binding dark forces. After weeks of searching, Thomas found Elijah's hidden cabin deep in the woods outside Boston. The air there was thick with decay, and the trees seemed to lean inward, whispering secrets on the wind. Inside, Elijah was a shadow of a man, eyes sunken yet burning with strange fire. He warned Thomas that the collector was no mere spirit, but a living manifestation of humanity's deepest fears and sins, an eternal predator feeding on souls caught between worlds. The only way to escape, Elijah said gravely, is to confront the darkness within yourself and offer a sacrifice of your own making. Thomas recoiled at the thought, but the price of freedom was clear. Back in his basement lab, Thomas prepared for a final ritual, gathering relics, sigils, and ancient texts. As midnight struck, he began the incantation, the words heavy with power and dread. The room grew cold, shadows coalesced, forming the towering figure of the collector once more. It spoke in a voice like grinding bones, demanding payment. Thomas, trembling but resolute, extended his hands. He offered his memories, the core of his identity, as a sacrifice to the void. Pain seared through him as memories unraveled like fragile threads, leaving emptiness in their wake. The collector recoiled, its form flickering, then dissipating into the darkness. Thomas collapsed, a hollow shell but free. Yet, as dawn broke, the first whispers began anew. In the shadows of Boston, the collector's hunger never truly dies, it only waits. The days that followed Thomas's final sacrifice were eerily silent, as if the very air in Boston was holding its breath. His body remained, but his soul was adrift, an empty vessel haunted by fleeting shadows and fragmented memories. The people who once knew him whispered of a man, changed beyond recognition. Thomas no longer spoke. His eyes stared blankly into the distance, reflecting a void that no light could penetrate. But the darkness he battled did not vanish. Instead, it seeped into the city's fabric, weaving itself into whispered legends and half-forgotten tales told in hushed voices around flickering fires. Locals spoke of strange occurrences, unexplained disappearances, phantom footsteps echoing in empty streets, and a chilling presence lurking just beyond sight. They called it the collector's curse. Years later, in a dusty attic, a tattered diary surfaced drive. Samuel Crane's final journal, stained with age and ink. Within its pages lay the full story of Thomas's descent and the warning that none who sought to master death should ignore. The final entry was a plea, a desperate hope that someone, someday, would find a way to seal the rift forever. But deep beneath Boston, in forgotten tunnels where the light never reaches, the shadows stir. The collector waits, and the nightmare continues.